Hello everyone, welcome to I Made This and So Can You. I'm Miss Laura from Monroe Public Library, and I'm going to be doing an embroidery project. Now, it's important to know that I do not know how to embroider. I know how to cross stitch, but as for the rest of it, this is going to be a learning opportunity. Maybe the same sort of learning opportunity that you would have if you picked out an embroidery book from our library. If you know how to embroider already, please be patient throughout this video. And if you've got any good tips, send them my way. Let's get started. So, I'm going about this using a combination of things I learned from the book Edgy Embroidery and some frantic Googling. And the first thing you have to do when you embroider is transfer your pattern to your fabric. I made this a little bit complicated by choosing a pattern that required dark fabric, which the internet assures me is the most complicated type of fabric to transfer an embroidery pattern onto. But armed with the tracing light box, which you can check out as a curiosity kit, and a handy marking pen, we're gonna do our best. So I'm going to turn the light box on, and it's really cool. It lights things up so you can place your pattern on top of it, and then whatever you want to trace it onto, whether it's paper or fabric, and then put it on top of it. And you can see through it. Okay, you can sort of see through it on the camera, but I can see through it better. Now, I'm not super concerned about where exactly I'm getting the little stars and meteors and everything, because the cool thing about embroidery is you can kind of do whatever you want with it. You get to be creative and do whatever works best for you and your design. For example, there are a whole bunch of tiny little stars on my design that I'm not marking off right now, partially because it's difficult to see the really little dots through the black fabric, partially because I think I can just fill those in wherever I think they need to be once everything else is done. Okay, so when I turn the light off, I've got my design. It shows up in white. And this pen is actually washable, so I'll be able to wash it out when I'm done if I can still see any at the end. Now it's time to put it in my embroidery hoop. I have these hanging around because of cross-stitching. You might have some somewhere, otherwise you can pick them up for not much. So it looks like this, and we loosen it up here, and then we can pop that out. And what we're gonna do is lay the fabric over it, and I'm trying to center it as much as possible. And that feels pretty good. So I'm going to take this and lay it down over the hoop. So it looks like that. And then I'm tightening it as much as I can. You want your fabric to be pretty taut, I believe. Okay, I've got my pattern. It's on my embroidery hoop. It's slightly off center, so I'm going to fix that. That looks better to me, so I'll tighten it up again. And there we go. All right, now it's time to do our actual embroidery. Now, people say you're never supposed to tie knots, and you're supposed to learn other ways of tying things off when you do embroidery. I am a big proponent in not learning so much all at once that it becomes overwhelming. And I looked at the instructions for starting stitches without doing knots, and I got confused. And so what I have done is broken a rule. And I give you permission. Break the rules that you need to get yourself having fun and learning and invested in a new craft, a new hobby, whatever. Break some rules. I am going to be doing the satin stitch on this top planet here. And what I'm going to do is poke my needle through from the underside, pull it through, and my knot is going to catch it, and I'm going to then go all the way to the other side and poke it back through. Pulling my thread in, and I've done my very first stitch. Now, the book suggests starting in the middle of your shapes and going like middle to top or middle to bottom first, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing another stitch right below the first one and going across again. And now I've got 2 stitches there. And I'm just going to keep doing that until my planet is filled in. Ta-da! A whole planet! Alright, so you can see it's got just same lines going back and forth. I learned a lot doing this. I got better at making sure that they were up next to each other, so it looked like a solid-ish continuous thing. I think it helps that it's a planet, so it's not supposed to look perfectly smooth, because planets, guys, they're not smooth. But now I'm going to tie it off in the back, and I am again not doing this entirely how I should be doing it. But what I've done is pull my thread through one of the little stitches on the back, and I'm going to loop it around again the same way that I put it in, and I'm going to make another tiny little knot. All right. And now I'm going to do this planet down here, which will be mostly the same thing, except it will also have some thread of a different color going over the top of it to add some texture and visual interest. And here we are with all 4 planets. You can see in all of them except the green one the different color variation. We just did the embroidery floss right on top of the other embroidery floss to make the cool striation pattern. And you can also see that I'm definitely still learning how to stitch inside the lines and make it a circular pattern, because this cool purple planet here has a little chunk that's not very circular. Totally fine. Okay, but this planet here is going to have some rings. Well, it's going to have 1 ring around it, which means we're doing a new stitch. This one is called the backstitch, and I actually know how to do it from cross-stitching and from sewing. So what we're going to do, I've already knotted this. Again, I'm still knotting things. And I'm going to put the needle in where I want it to go before the first place where I'm stitching it. And then I pull it up and I put it down at the start of the stitch. So I'm going to set it in right where the edge of the planet is. And then I'm going to go ahead of where the next stitch will start or end and do it backwards. So I've got my stitch there, and then I go back to the edge of the first one to make a continuous line. All right, and then here where the ring is going across the planet, the instructions say not to keep doing multiple different back stitches across the planet where I'd be going in and piercing the satin stitch, but instead to do just one big long stitch all the way across the planet, like that. And then I'll just finish up the rest of the ring. And here we are. All the planets are done. Now we just need to do the stars and the swirly bits. Now we're doing something a little different. instead of using the whole thing of embroidery floss, we're using 3 of its strands. Embroidery floss is made out of 6 different strands that are kind of woven together, and you can pull them apart and use all the strands individually or some of them to make your thread a little bit different size. And so what we're using for the small stars and the body of the shooting stars is 3 strands. So I pulled it apart and I threaded my needle with just 3 strands. And now it's time to do a French knot. This is very exciting because I don't know how to do a French knot. I did do a couple of test French knots on a different piece of fabric. So what we're going to do is pierce through in one of our shooting star bodies. And we pull it up. Then what we do is hold part of it up here and wrap it around the needle once or twice, or you can do more if you want your French knot to be bigger. And then we put it down, not quite through the same hole that it came up with, but really close. And we pull. And there we go, a French knot. So I'm going to do that for all the shooting stars in my little bit of space here. And then the instructions say to do the small stars next, but you might remember that I didn't actually mark where all the small stars went. So I'm going to do that last, after I do the larger stars and the trailing bits of the shooting stars. For both of those things, the large stars and the shooting star tail, I'm going to be using 1 piece of embroidery floss, 1 strand of floss, and doing a backstitch just like I did for the ring of this big planet here. One important thing is that I'm going to be tying off my thread in between each French knot, because you shouldn't let your thread travel all the way across the back of your embroidery. You might notice that mine is pretty messy, and a lot of people will tell you that you need to have a super neat back, but I'm here to tell you that you're the only one who's ever going to see it unless you are entering it to be judged. So go wild. But you still probably shouldn't have it going all the way across the fabric because it can pull, and sometimes, probably not with this black fabric, but with some fabrics you can see it through the fabric when it goes all the way across. All right, all the stars are on now. Here it is, close up. And you know what? It's not perfect, but I am really happy with it. All in all, I am very glad that I made it. I'm super excited with how it turned out, and I hope that some of you will be inspired to pick up a book and do a craft that you never thought you would do. The book I used was Edgy Embroidery, and it has a ton of really cool patterns. There are skulls with flower crowns, there's all sorts of plant-related things, there's this space one, and it's really great. You can find it right here in the library. This has been I Made This and So Can You. Have a wonderful day and good luck with whatever you choose to make.